All right, looks like I'm live. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about E85 today. The goods, the bads, the uglies, where to use it, where not to use it, things like that. So I have in front of me a fuel sending unit assembly, all tore down, some new and some old parts. I'm going to go over this in a little bit. Before I do though, this is actually a situation of a failure that happened, and this was on Thursday on a Corvette. So this is actually a C6 Corvette component set here, and I will show what failed and what caused it to fail once we get to that point. We have a couple of fuel pumps here. One is aftermarket, one is factory. The factory one's actually the new one. But where do and don't you use Where do and don't you use E85? Now, stock vehicles, your stock pickup, for instance, or car, or whatever you have, if it's bone stock and you're not looking for any performance gains at all, you're not getting a tune, it's all totally bone stock, the only way I would ever even consider using something like E85 ethanol is if you're some kind of emissions nut, where you want to release as little emissions into the air as possible while you're driving. Now, I don't know the specifics on how much emissions are released while they make the stuff or process the stuff in the factories, but I'd imagine that probably counteracts anything done on the side of what your vehicle releases. However, it does burn much, much cleaner than regular gasoline. Now, the proof of this is in the cylinders and the spark plugs, and you can actually see it on your own vehicle. If you have a flex fuel vehicle, give yourself a little test and go ahead and check your spark plugs running your regular fuel, whatever you normally run for fuel, if it's not E85, of course. And check your spark plugs, pull them out, look at them, maybe even change just one, and write down, take pictures, take a look. And you can prove this for yourself. So take the one that you changed, write down which one you have, put a brand new one in, and drive it a little bit longer on gas if you like. Check it again and see what it looks like. It'll get dirty fairly, somewhat quick, and then go ahead and switch over to E85. Now, you're going to have to run the E85 a little bit before you start checking things, but you can actually check the spark plugs, and the spark plugs that were dirty will clean up and become more white than they were before, unless they're really old spark plugs. And the new one will also be very white. So it's a very clean burning fuel. It'll clean off your pistons, it'll clean off your combustion chambers, all that stuff. It's a heavy oxygenated fuel, so it has a lot of oxygen in it. Now, that of course offers a lot of drawbacks. It is more corrosive because oxygen is what oxidizes and corrodes things, of course. So it's definitely a very corrosive fuel in the respect of metals and things of that nature. However, where it burns, it does not corrode things. So in the combustion chamber, you're obviously not going to get any corrosion in there. That's not going to happen. Now, it's also a very, I guess you could call it moisture intensive fuel? I don't know how to word it, but being an alcohol, it absorbs water. So it's good in that it'll dilute water down that's in your tank, and it'll still go through and burn. However, it's bad in a way because it also puts a lot more water in your tailpipe. And if you don't have a stainless exhaust, say you have an aftermarket, just really cheap steel exhaust, your exhaust is going to rot out very, very quickly because of the amount of water that this stuff releases. You'll notice a lot more water coming out of your tailpipe, but that's one of the byproducts of alcohol. It's more water. Now, where would you use it? Where is the good place to use E85? A good reason to use E85 is for performance things. E85 has a natural octane rating of about 108 for the octane rating. Now, of course, you go to the pump and the most you can typically get is 93 octane. E85 is 108, just the way it is, roughly. So when it comes to performance, you can crank up your ignition timing if you don't have higher compression. It'll give you a little bit more oomph out of it, but not much. It'll also allow you to crank up the compression You can add a bunch of boost to it. It's very, very good for performance applications. Where is it really bad? It is really bad if you're trying to get fuel economy, because if you run anything under E30, so like an E15 or something, it'll crush your regular unleaded economy. If you run E30, it seems that's kind of like an okay place as long as the vehicle's tuned for it. It'll run reasonably comparable to regular gas. But if you go even further, you go to E60 or above, for instance, or go E85, you're going to get very, very inefficient miles per gallon. It's going to just suck the fuel down. And that's because it requires a lot more fuel to make it detonate. Since it has the oxygen in it, it just requires more of the fuel to get the hydrocarbons to cause the explosion that it needs to cause. So why do I have these parts in front of me, and why did this system fail? So this was a vehicle that I've done a lot of mods to. I have quite a few videos of this vehicle on my channel, and I'm going to bring you guys closer here in a second. But while you're zoomed out, I'll just give you kind of a view of what's going on here. This is the sending unit as an assembly. If I were to put this all together, of course, you know, things sit places. Some of the stuff sits in here. But we're going to go over what failed on this thing. So this particular customer was driving along, and just like a light switch, it died. It stopped working. And the fuel pump is actually still good. In fact, I'll just go ahead and do a quick little proof of this. This is the fuel pump that was in the car. And you can hear it. Fires up just fine. So fuel pump works good. So why didn't it work good in the vehicle, and why did I have to pull it all out? Let's go ahead and bring you a little bit closer. If my phone drops, I apologize. I have a really janky setup right now. But we're going to go ahead and bring you guys in a little bit here so I can watch the screen and see what I'm doing for you. There we go. All right. So we have some components. We have a brand new fuel hose I refuse to use. I learned my lesson on this. This was a C6 situation where this fuel hose is so tight on here. I mean, look at the size of the hole versus the size of the line. So when you put this thing on, it has to stretch really far to get over these barbs, and it'll split. As soon as you start clamping it, it'll start to get ready to split, and then as soon as you start running it in the vehicle for any amount of time, it'll split the hose, leak out, and of course that's no good. So I've learned not to use this hose. Get a special high pressure fuel capable hose from your local store that actually fits this if it's that tight. Now this system, we'll go ahead and do kind of like a layout here so that you guys can imagine how this thing actually functions. This particular vehicle has 2 tanks in it. So this is the fuel filter, if you will, that sits in there. This guy goes here, and then the fuel sock would sit here, and then this is an in-tank regulator. Now how does the system work? We have the basket down here with the sock and the pump inside the basket. And the basket on this one, you can see all that debris, and I'll explain where that debris came from in just a moment here. But this pump, the factory one, which is this guy here, this pump actually sends fuel up here, and then there's this little nipple here, and this guy goes into this here. I'm not sure what this part of the system is for. If anybody knows, go ahead and explain it. I am not very familiar with it. It looks like it's some kind of weird siphoning out of the bottom of the tank kind of a thing, maybe. I'm not totally positive of that. I really don't care, because whenever I put the aftermarket pump in, it does not have that, so I eliminate it. Now, this is an E85 compatible pump. This is the factory non-E85 compatible pump. It probably would work fine for a fairly long time on E85. I don't see why not. I don't know what the real difference is. Maybe it's because of the sealed connectors, which I'll explain about that as well here soon. But the fuel goes up. This hose goes into a fitting that is sitting right here. This fitting goes into the filter box area. The fuel that gets used by the vehicle, of course, comes out the top. And then we have this fitting here that goes under to this deal here. This deal is what contains the fuel pressure regulator. And on these cars, You know, it's sitting right there. It just bleeds it off, right? And then this guy here goes over to a crossover tube for the other side of the fuel tank. So this guy, I don't know if it's restricted here, it must be on the other side it's restricted. It goes over to the other side, and then it causes a draft effect. So they must have a hose. I didn't actually look at it this time, so I forget what it looks like, so excuse me for that. But it has a hose that pushes fuel across another hose area to create a Venturi effect, if you will. And however it's set up, it might be in the plastic, it might be in a hose, I don't know, but the hoses go over, create a Venturi effect, and then another hose brings it back, and dang it, hopefully you guys don't have headphones on, that would have hurt. This guy's supposed to sit like this. And then there's a hole right here, and this is where the hose comes out as well, but this hole, there's another hose that sits just hanging out right inside there like that. And that guy is what's dumping fuel into this from the other tank. And that's to make sure the other tank stays as low as possible and this tank stays as full as possible, because this is the one with the pump, of course. So that's kind of how that system works. Now, why did this one fail? So I put an aftermarket pump in this guy, and this was, geez, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, I'd say at least, probably. Now, this aftermarket pump sits here. We have some wires going up to this guy here, and of course this guy plugs in over here. Now these wires, let me give you a little closer look here at these wires, because they're kind of the telltale of what happened with this system. Now for anybody who actually knows what clean copper looks like, you'll know that, come on, this is not, come on, give me some focus. I'll go to this. We'll get a couple wires in here just in case it focuses better. Oop, oh, I had it. Come on. There we go. Okay. So you can see the copper color. It's not very copper color. I'm going to go ahead and give an example of some clean copper. Just clean this off a little bit. We'll see if we can get a better view of the clean stuff. Can't really get a good reflection. There, you can see the difference. Oh, come on. The camera life. There we go. So you can see now there's all kinds of different colorations or grades of color, if it would ever stay focused. Anyway, this is corroded. It's lightly oxidized and corroded. And if you remember, I told you just a minute ago that E85 is an oxidizing fuel. So this wire is cut back quite a ways because I was trying to see if I could find clean wire. The sending unit's obviously, I mean, you can see the color of it. It's faded and weird. The new one was white, like this color of white. So the new one is, obviously this is old. This is just old. But the wires, being as corroded as they are, sure, I could have replaced the pins, but I'm not going to bother with replacing the pins because the whole thing is just well aged. And on top of that, there's a little meltage going on. Trying to get you guys better views here. Little meltage going on where the regulator thing sits, and that was caused from the wires that I had to cut back, because you can see the wires that were in there. Come on, there we go. You can see the wires that were in there. This one got so hot as it was running across that one, it heated up and burnt that little crimp fitting. Normally, I say no to crimp fittings. Being inside of a fuel tank and knowing how to properly crimp a crimp fitting, you make sure you can't pull it apart, and you pull pretty hard. I was willing to put this in a fuel tank because normally with regular unleaded gas, I have no problems with corrosion and crimp fittings because they're in fuel. There's no anything causing it to get a corrosion issue, at least not within a very quick time frame. So I was willing to put crimp fittings in. Hindsight's always 20/20. I should not have used crimp fittings. The crimp fittings allow oxygen in when the tank gets down low. And since it's an oxidizing fuel to begin with, it's oxidizing things. Now, I really had not much of a choice other than to do a sealed type connector with properly crimping the connector and everything else. So I would have had to use these little seals that come with it, and then the proper pins and things like that. This came with the new pump. I don't recall if it came with this pump or not. Maybe it didn't, but this kit that we got on the new pump that we just put in, it did come with this stuff here, and it came with some crimp fittings, which I just threw in the trash, especially after seeing this. But you can't solder and heat shrink these. There's some kind of a weird stainless kind of a wire, and soldering them just does not work very well at all. So I chose not to solder them. I chose to crimp them, and like I said, hindsight 2020, of course, I caused a failure later on, and I'm willing to admit that. You can see the, come on, focus, there we go. You can see the amount of corrosion that's going on there, and this is where it actually broke, was right at that end there. It pulled out, legitimately pulled out of there. So it just failed inside this connector to where it fell apart, overheated, because it lost connection, and then started melting and separated completely. So luckily it did not cause any fuel issue, but there's probably not quite enough oxygen that's in a form that can cause a fuel issue in the tank. So is what it is. It failed. Learned a lesson. The new system, it actually came with this style connector already on it, and then they sent another one. I don't understand that. But it came with this style connector already on the pump, and it was, well, about yay long. And then they gave the other end with a set of wires already on it, and that's probably because they realized that this type of system doesn't work. Why they included those butt connectors anyway, I don't know. But I ended up putting that in there, and then taking this guy here and running those wires from the new pigtail all the way up to the top here. So I pulled the new connector apart, solder, heat shrink on the new wires, and then I actually, you can see this cavity right here. It's actually airtight up here. So I put a little grease in here. That way when I plug this in, it pushed grease out the bottom, because this is not any kind of sealed connector. Because like I said, gasoline, you don't have to worry about having anything sealed. It's not, it doesn't oxidize near as bad. It's got an oil in it, so it doesn't really cause any issues. Sorry about that. So we'll go ahead and give you a view of this. There, you can see the back of the connectors there. There is no sealer whatsoever on those connectors. So it's kind of unique. And poor design for E85's sake, but of course for gasoline it's perfectly fine. So I did feel kind of crummy today though, because I had to take a brand new sending unit and literally tear it apart and modify it to fit a different pump in it. So I have a brand new pump, a brand new regulator that will never be used, at least in a normal situation or in this situation. But there's that. There's a new sock design too. So they give you this sock design, and I actually used the factory one since I had a new sending unit. The factory sending unit, you can see this little slot here. So the factory sock, it's like really narrow and long. It sticks out like this, and then there's these little plastic frame things. You can see those. Those are actually in a way that it's intended for that sock to bend and go up into the slot. And since that was a nicer design, I chose to use that sock instead. I've never seen a sock be affected by E85, so I don't think that's going to be any kind of issue whatsoever. But I mentioned the debris. That, of course, is from the wires breaking down and throwing crap into here. And then I'm sure some of that is stuff that just came through the filler neck when filling up with fuel or whatever too. So, alright, I'm going to go ahead and bring you guys over to my computer just because I have not been watching comments, and the computer is much easier for me to see comments from. So, let's see if there's anything there. Well, I see the guy who I know the car is from. Lead solder. Okay, so Kevin's saying, yes, you can flux and lead solder. Flux is bad. You probably know that. You probably just misspoke. Rosin core is what you really need for soldering wires to prevent corrosion. And even rosin has some form of oxidant. I've seen it corrode still. So I try and wipe it off as best I can. A little water, a little brake clean, something, whatever I have nearby that I can wipe it off with. I try not to use water if I can because it's obviously a corrosive thing as well. Look at ethanol as water. It really doesn't have very long life either. They have mixers in the tank. Okay, so Kevin C, look at ethanol as water. It doesn't really have very long life. That is for sure. Good point. I'm glad you brought that up. So ethanol is a very, very poor life expectancy. Because of the oxygen that's in it, it tends to age very quickly, very rapidly, especially if you try and store a car with ethanol with a low tank. Now, if you fill the tank all the way, the air gap that's in there will make it last. At least you can store it through a winter or whatever, but I would never go longer than a winter. Another thing I've seen because of the amount of oxygen in E85 is performance fuel rails. They'll drain back, and then of course anything where there's threads, where there's a chance of oxygen sitting behind, will get very corroded. Kevin C says you have to have flux to tin wires. That's the point of rosin core, or rosin. It's a form of flux, but it's not as corrosive as flux. Flux is good for scenarios where you're really going to rinse it off very well, or for plumbing, because plumbing really doesn't matter. You have water going by, and it never sees road conditions. So road conditions, of course, are one of the harshest conditions you can drive in, especially in places like Minnesota where we have salt on the roads and things like that. Of course, you don't expect that to get on your wires because you should be sealing it off with heat shrink tubing, but still, it's just, I don't know if it's something in the air or what, but I've seen the difference between rosin core and flux core when it comes to the wires. And I say core, I mean you could use a paste, but I use cord where the solder is filled in with it. Rosin core versus flux core. The flux core will corrode really bad. Rosin core won't let solder to bond. Then how am I doing it? Works very well for me. I don't know. I don't have any issue with it. It seems to work great. In fact, I just used it. I got something I used down here. It is. Go ahead and pull this out quick. I gotta set the phone down. See if my solder says it right on it. There it is. Okay, I got the solder. I'm gonna have to flip the phone over. Okay, so this is the solder that I used. You can see it's 6040 rosin core solder. And without much effort, this is a brush assembly. You can see it stuck very well. Of course, I had to clean the surface well on the brass, the brass part here for the brush guide, because it was very dirty. It was actually like a tarnished color. And this is another situation of a E85 fuel pump. This is a very high flow fuel pump. The fuel actually goes across here. The brush is worn out in this motor, and so I had to replace the brushes. And of course I don't have the motor on me right now, but this is just the little plate for the brushes. And I just want to put new brushes in it, new springs, and this should be good to go now. But the rosin core obviously did a good job of soldering it. I would not be able to pull those off of there. It would tear the wires off. So kind of a little proof of concept there. Yeah, copper, brass. I mean, this is brass, this is copper, or this is a bronze maybe, I don't know. But it's definitely not copper, because the copper is the wire itself. But either way, you can solder brass, you can solder copper, it doesn't matter. As long as it's not aluminum or like magnesium, you definitely can't solder that. But you can solder steel, you can solder copper, brass, what have you. Alright, so I don't know what else I really have to say on this, so I think I am going to go ahead and dip out. If you guys have any quick questions to hop in there, go for it. Alright, I see Alexander, see what he says here. Oh, just mentioning that my videos have been helpful with his head gasket job. on his Yukon. If you're getting coolant in cylinder 7, I would be very cautious. Get the heads tested. Unless you see something obvious on the head gasket that says, hey, I was leaking here, be sure to get those heads tested. I have heard of GM heads cracking quite a bit, and they crack in odd spots. Like they go through the side of the casting and into the intake area or into the valve stem area in some cases. So they crack in some very unique areas. Alright, Dodge 5.7, no compression on cylinder. 1, 4, 6, and 7 have compression on the first initial crank. ECU has ability to control solenoids. TOD delete, yeah, exactly. So the Dodge 5.7, I don't know specifics on the Dodge 5.7. Now, that's because where I live, I don't see Dodge. I mean, I seriously see a couple of cars, and that's about it. There's a Dodge pickup across the street that's from like 2002. It's super old. I don't see much Dodge products around in my area. We just don't have them, so I don't ever work on them. Now, being you have a 1, 4, 6, and 7, those are identical cylinders to the GMs with the AFM system. So I would assume that their MDS, whatever their acronym means, I know it's a form of an AFM system. I would assume that that's because your system is being either mechanically or electronically commanded on right after you start it. It's probably a mechanical thing. If it was a GM engine, I would say you're getting oil pressure fed to the lifters because you said right after startup, the cylinder stopped firing. That tells me that the oil pressure is collapsing the lifters, and it's probably because either you have a short making the system apply power to the solenoids that activate the system, making it go into the displacement mode, or it's a situation of your lifters are just getting pressure from some other location. So I don't know what's going on there, but it's getting some kind of oil pressure if it was a GM, but it's a Dodge. So look up the system. Perhaps it works the same way. If it does, then that's where I would go, is try and find out why the lifters are getting pressurized. So Lawrence Garrison, you mentioned a DOD delete. I actually want to do another delete video. I don't see any coming up anytime soon. I am just slammed with work on performance cars actually right now, and engines. For some reason I'm stuck with engines. This COVID-19 situation has caused some shipping issues for me. So I'm having trouble getting parts, and so I have several engines actually. You can see 2 of them bagged up right there. I have another one on the way. But solder for stainless. But anyway, the shipping on the parts, the custom parts, is becoming an issue. Okay, now Kevin, you mentioned the paste flux on solder for stainless. Now that might work. I could believe that. I know there's different solders that can actually solder things like aluminum. I have used them. I don't know what their makeup is, but it's a special type of material, and it actually works better than I would have expected, but it's very low temperature. It melts extremely easy, and it's very finicky, but I have used it on the special ones on aluminum. Now stainless, I have kind of been able to solder them, but it took a lot of work and it was very challenging, and I just kind of gave up on it. But I could certainly try lead and actual flux. I just don't know how much I would want to do it on a wire because, of course, the flux travels down the wire itself. Now, if I'm doing a stainless wire to a stainless wire, yeah, heck yeah, I'll try it. But most of the time, I'm sticking copper to stainless, and so I end up just twisting the wires real good and heat shrinking them with some adhesive heat shrink. Lays much smoother than rosin. I could believe that because flux just works better in general. It's so corrosive, I won't use it on wires if I can help it, if they're a corrosion type of wire. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and dip out. It is time for me to get in the house. I got to get some things done because I have more work to do tomorrow and some eating to do tomorrow. I'm actually going to go to a grill out, so it should be interesting. Watch Big Clive on YouTube. Big Clive. Alright, I like recommendations. I will go ahead and search him real quick while I'm right here and see what his channel or whatever looks like. Oop, I didn't put the E in there. Tear it down. BigClive.com. Oh, BigClive.com. Is that the guy? BigClive.com? Oh, I see a Big Clive Live. He's got a couple different things. I don't know. I'll click on one of them. Hopefully, I got the sound off. See, he's doing something on a bulb, so I'll go ahead and go to his page. Oh, so he does electronic stuff. I actually haven't seen his channel, and I watch quite a bit of electronic channel. So that'll be interesting. Good. I'll just keep that up, and I'll try looking at that a little bit later. I do enjoy watching electrical stuff, so I'm kind of a nerd that way. I do a little bit of everything. Electronics, computers, you name it. Archery, and a little bit of everything. See, spot on the heads. I got a comment from the guy with the cylinder head thing, so I'm going to pop back in there and see what he has to say before I take off. Spot on the heads where the leak was on the surface, by the coolant passage to the cylinder. Okay, asking about Felpro head gaskets and bolts. Yes, they're perfectly fine for stock applications. You will have no issues whatsoever, assuming that you check the block and the head. Now, checking the head surface, I believe, is unnecessary because you should just machine the head surface. I have never seen a cylinder head be machined without being all kinds of distorted, at least in some way, shape, or form. You might put a straight edge across it, and it might look straight. It might not. You might not see light through it, but I guarantee you it's got deviations wherever the bolts are. The only time I've seen one straight is one that I pulled off shortly after putting it on because something failed other than what I had just done, and so I had to pull the head off. That one actually cut fairly straight. In fact, one of the guys that commented on here, it was his car, the same guy with the fuel pump, when we took his head off after a valve seat decided to randomly drop and take out a piston. I had to change the piston, and that head, I don't think it would have been crooked because we just had it off that long ago. If I would have taken the time to cut it, that one probably would have been perfectly true yet because it did not have very many miles on it. But anyway, okay, I am out of here. I keep rambling and rambling and rambling, and I won't stop unless I make myself. So have fun, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and the quick chat that we had. Thanks for watching.